The moment my ex-husband's lead attorney saw the elderly man standing next to me in court, his pen slipped right out of his hand, his knees completely buckled, and he sank back into his chair, looking like he was about to lose his mind. My ex, Mark, stared at him in total confusion, whispering, "What's wrong with you?" He had no idea that the quiet stranger sitting in my corner was about to destroy his entire defense. Look, if there's one thing I've learned, it's that arrogant people always assume they're the smartest room in the building. Mark thought he had me backed into a corner, ready to strip me of everything I worked for. He had no idea that a simple, 3-hour flight and one small gesture of kindness 24 hours earlier was going to completely ruin him. Okay, so, let me take you back to how this whole disaster started. If you're new here, subscribe, I post a new story every day. My marriage to Mark had been dead for over 2 years, but the divorce battle was pure psychological warfare. I was 33, working full-time, while Mark ran a corporate logistics company. When I finally caught him transferring shared savings into offshore accounts and filed for divorce, he didn't even get mad, he just smiled. He went out and hired Mr. Vance, a high-priced litigation lawyer known for being an absolute pit bull in financial disputes. They made it very clear that they were going to drag out the trial until I ran out of money for legal fees. The day before our big financial disclosure hearing, I was flying back from visiting my sick mother. I was exhausted, stressed out of my mind, and sitting in an aisle seat near the front of economy. That's when an elderly gentleman stepped onto the plane, looking completely overwhelmed. His name was Arthur. He was holding a heavy vintage leather bag, visibly limping, and trying to find a spot in the overcrowded overhead bins. People were bumping past him, rolling their eyes, and complaining about the delay. Now, here's where I'd have lost it if I saw people treating a senior like that. Nobody moved a muscle to help him. So I stood up, took his heavy bag, and safely stowed it in the bin above my seat. Then I noticed he was holding a middle seat ticket 3 rows back, struggling to stand. I offered him my aisle seat right on the spot so he wouldn't have to squeeze into the back with his bad knee. He looked at me with genuine relief and murmured, "Young lady, chivalry and patience are becoming rare commodities in this world." We talked for most of the flight. I didn't spill every painful detail, but I mentioned I was flying home for a crucial legal hearing the next day. Arthur listened quietly, sipping his black coffee, and mentioned he spent decades working in legal instruction and state administration before retiring. He was wearing a simple, slightly faded jacket, carrying himself with total humility. Before we got off the plane, he handed me a card with his name and a number, saying, "Remember, those who try to intimidate you in a courtroom are usually hiding their own weakness." Have you ever done a small favor for a stranger and had it come back to help you in ways you never imagined? Let me know in the comments below. The next morning at 9 a.m., I was sitting alone at the petitioner's table in courtroom 402. My court-appointed lawyer was stuck in traffic, 10 minutes late, and my hands were shaking. Across the room sat Mark in a tailor-made suit, chatting casually with Vance, his high-powered lawyer. Vance gave me this smug, predatory look, tapping his leather folder on the desk like he was ready to wipe the floor with me. Then, right as the clerk called for order, the back doors creaked open. In walked Arthur, wearing his same simple jacket, carrying a slim folder. He smiled softly at me, walked past the gallery divider, and pulled out a chair right at my table. I whispered in panic, "Arthur, what are you doing here? You don't need to get involved in this." He just set his hand on the desk and murmured, "Don't worry, my dear. Just wanted to see how things went." Across the room, Vance looked over at our table, scoffed out loud, and whispered a joke to Mark about me bringing my grandfather for support. Wait, read that part again in your head, because the utter arrogance of these two was unreal. At 9:15 a.m., the side doors opened, and the bailiff announced Judge Sterling. We all stood up. Vance stepped forward, practically beaming with confidence, ready to deliver his opening statement. Judge Sterling adjusted his glasses, looked down at our table, and stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes locked onto Arthur sitting quietly beside me. Judge Sterling didn't just look surprised, his jaw went slack. Arthur gave a subtle, polite nod from where he stood. Across the room, Vance saw the judge's reaction, looked back at Arthur, and suddenly realized who he was actually looking at. I watched Vance's face drain of all color in real time. His pen dropped out of his fingers, his knees visibly buckled, and he collapsed back into his leather chair like he had been struck by lightning. Mark turned to his attorney, panicked, yelling, "Vance! What are you doing? Stand up!" Vance grabbed Mark's arm, his voice shaking, and hissed, shut up right now, Mark." Is there anything more satisfying than watching an arrogant lawyer completely lose his composure in front of a judge? Drop a comment below. I sat there, completely stunned, trying to figure out what was happening. Judge Sterling actually stood up from his bench, clearing his throat with immense respect. "Dean Calloway," Judge Sterling said, his voice echoing in the silent room. "It is an absolute honor. I didn't realize you were attending today's proceedings." I gasped and turned to Arthur. "I'll be honest, I didn't expect what came next." It turns out, retired legal teacher, Arthur was actually Arthur Calloway, the former Chief Justice of the State Appellate Court, former Dean of the University Law Faculty, and the literal pioneer who co-authored the state's current corporate financial disclosure laws. He was Vance's former professor, and the man who had written the exact legal precedents Vance was trying to twist against me. Arthur stood up smoothly and said, "Good morning, Your Honor. I am here as a friend of the court to assist Mrs. Whitney, as I noticed several grave statutory oversights in the financial affidavits filed by the defense." Arthur pulled a single document from his folder and placed it on the desk. He hadn't fabricated a thing, he had simply pulled public state registries overnight that exposed 2 hidden offshore accounts Mark had tried to conceal from the court. Vance couldn't even stand up to object. He sat there sweating through his shirt, stammering apologies, while Judge Sterling laid into him for filing bad faith disclosures. Judge Sterling immediately ordered a full forensic audit of Mark's business, froze all his assets, and threatened Vance with severe professional sanctions. When we walked out into the hallway after the hearing adjourned, Mark was pale, shaking, and screaming at Vance, who was clutching his chest, trying to figure out how his entire reputation had just vanished in 30 minutes. Arthur turned to me with a warm, gentle smile and said, "Never let arrogant men convince you that you are alone, my dear." Looking back, that day taught me something I will never forget. Arrogance always thinks it has the upper hand, but a single act of genuine kindness can build a foundation that no amount of money or legal tricks can tear down. What do you think of Vance's reaction when he realized who Arthur was? Did Mark get what he deserved? Drop your thoughts in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. I post a brand new story every single day. See you tomorrow. Wait, let's pause right there, because you have to picture what was happening at the defense table. Vance wasn't just embarrassed, he was practically hyperventilating into his leather notebook. Mark kept leaning over, grabbing Vance by the shoulder, practically shaking him, whispering, "Do something. You're getting paid 10 grand for this. Stand up and object." Asterisk. But Vance couldn't object. How do you object when the man sitting across from you is the literal architect of the statutory code you're trying to bend? I'll be honest, I didn't expect what came next, but Judge Sterling wasn't even close to being done. He leaned over his bench, adjusted his glasses, and looked directly at Vance with a gaze that could melt steel. "Counselor," Judge Sterling said, his voice dropping an octave into pure ice. "In my 15 years on this bench, I have rarely seen a financial affidavit submitted with such deliberate, calculated omissions. Did you truly believe a Midwest shell corporation registered under an unlisted LLC wouldn't be flagged in a marital division proceeding?" Vance tried to stand up. His knees literally knocked against the wood of the defense desk. "Why, Your Honor," Vance stammered, clutching his microphone like a lifesaver. My client assured our firm that all secondary corporate assets were fully compartmentalized prior to the marriage." "Your client lied to you, Mr. Vance," Judge Sterling interrupted flatly. "Or worse, you enabled him. Now here's where I'd have lost it if I were sitting in Mark's shoes." Arthur didn't even raise his voice. He just leaned back in his chair, unbuttoned his worn blazer, and quietly added another single page to the middle of the table. If I may, Your Honor, Arthur said calmly, as if he were just hosting a quiet Sunday afternoon seminar. The secondary account registered in the Cayman Registry was actually opened using the petitioner's signature, which appears to be a digital tracing from her 2022 tax filing. The entire courtroom went dead silent again. Forgery. Mark hadn't just hidden money, he had forged my name to set up the offshore account so that if the tax authorities ever audited it, the liability would fall on me. Mark's face went from pale white to a deep, panicked purple. He looked at me, then at Arthur, and for the first time in 3 years, I saw real, unadulterated fear in his eyes. He realized in that exact second that he wasn't just losing a divorce settlement, he was looking at potential federal financial fraud charges. Vance looked down at the document Arthur had provided, turned to Mark, and literally pushed his chair away from him. Vance whispered loud enough for the first 2 rows to hear, "We are done. I am withdrawing as your counsel of record the second this hearing adjourns." Asterisk. Mark grabbed Vance's sleeve, his voice cracking, "You can't leave me. I paid your retainer." Asterisk. "I'm protecting my law license, Mark." Vance hissed back, pulling his arm away. Would you have felt any pity for an ex-spouse watching their entire plan collapse in front of a courtroom, or would you sit back and enjoy the justice? Let me know in the comments below. By 9:45 a.m., my court-appointed legal aid attorney finally slipped into the courtroom, breathless, carrying her jammed briefcase. She took one look at the defense table, Vance sitting with his head in his hands, Mark sweating through his shirt, and then looked at Arthur sitting next to me. Her eyes went wide. She almost dropped her coffee. Dean Calloway, she whispered, completely flabbergasted. Arthur just gave her a warm smile, stood up, and pulled out her chair for her. "Good morning," Arthur murmured gently. "I took the liberty of outlining the non-disclosure violations for the judge while you were in traffic. The floor is all yours." Judge Sterling didn't even wait for a formal motion. He issued an immediate emergency injunction freezing every single bank account associated with Mark's corporate logistics firm, ordered an independent forensic audit at Mark's sole expense, and granted me full temporary possession of our primary home and marital assets. He then turned to the court clerk and stated for the record that the local prosecutor's office should be provided with copies of the forged signature disclosures for immediate review. When Judge Sterling brought the gavel down, the sound echoed like a lightning strike through the room. Mark slumped forward in his chair, his head resting against the table, completely ruined. His high-priced lawyer didn't even wait for him. Vance packed his briefcase in 10 seconds flat and practically sprinted out the side exit to avoid the gallery. Arthur quietly gathered his simple manila folder, turned to me, and said, "Shall we get that cup of coffee now?" I looked at Mark one last time as he sat alone at the defense table, abandoned by his lawyer, facing the consequences of his own greed. And as we walked out into the morning sunlight, I realized that the flight I almost missed 24 hours ago didn't just save my financial future, it completely restored my faith in justice.